Karl Malone grew up in Summerfield, Louisiana, population small enough that the town barely registered on a map of a state that did not need many small towns to fill it. He was one of 9 children born to a family that did not have much, and what he had was a body that announced itself as different from the beginning. The kind of body that does not apologize for the space it occupies, but simply occupies it, thoroughly, as a statement of fact. By the time he arrived at Louisiana Tech University, he was 6 feet 9 inches tall and 256 pounds, which in 1985 was a weight that a power forward was not supposed to carry at that height without sacrificing mobility. Malone did not sacrifice mobility. He ran the floor like a man with 100 fewer pounds on his frame, which was not natural, but was the product of a conditioning regimen that he treated with the same intensity he brought to everything else, which was the intensity of someone who had decided that the things available to a large man from Summerfield, Louisiana, were the things he was going to earn rather than the things that were going to be handed to him because of where he started. The Utah Jazz selected him 13th overall in the 1985 NBA draft, behind 12 other players whose teams had miscalculated what they were looking at. In Salt Lake City, he found John Stockton, who had been drafted the year before, and who was at that point a backup point guard trying to take the starting job from Ricky Green. Stockton and Malone would become the most accomplished pick-and-roll partnership in the history of basketball. A simple play executed at such a consistent level of precision and speed that it became something the league spent 15 years trying to design a defense for, and never fully succeeded. Stockton set the screen. Malone rolled to the basket or caught the ball at the elbow. Defenses were required to choose which of the two they were more afraid of. Most of them were more afraid of Malone, which meant the help came toward Malone, which meant Stockton was open, which meant Stockton shot the ball, and made it because Stockton over 19 seasons made roughly half of everything he attempted and would retire as the all-time assist leader by a margin so large that the second-place player would have needed 5 additional All-Star seasons to close the gap. At Louisiana Tech, Malone had not been invited to the right showcases, had not played in the conferences that scouts attended by default, had not been packaged and presented in the way that the highest draft picks are packaged and presented. He was simply very good and very large, and the scouts who placed him 13th had underestimated, by the margin of 12 players, what he was going to become. What he became was the second leading scorer in the history of professional basketball. Not the second leading scorer among power forwards. The second leading scorer in the entire history of the game, behind only Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which is a sentence that can be written simply and should be understood with considerable weight. He was called the mailman because he always delivered. The nickname was given to him by a writer in Louisiana who had noticed the consistency of what Malone produced and reached for a metaphor that fit. And the metaphor was the Postal Service, because in those years, the Postal Service delivered reliably, on schedule, regardless of conditions. Every game, Malone delivered. 25 points per game for 19 seasons. 10 rebounds per game. The kind of statistical production that requires not just talent, but the specific discipline to show up at full capacity on the 4th night of a back-to-back in February, in a city where no one was watching, and produce. He led the NBA in free throw attempts for 5 consecutive seasons because opposing defenses had calculated accurately that the only way to manage his post-up was to foul him before he could finish. And even the foul was not always sufficient. He made 74% of those free throws across his career. He was the mailman. He delivered. He threw elbows. This is also true, and it is true in a way that the biographical facts require honesty to acknowledge. Isaiah Thomas in 1991 required 40 stitches above his left eye after a Malone elbow opened the skin in a way that skin is not designed to open. Hakeem Olajuwon received one. David Robinson received one in 1998 that was not accidental, in the sense that none of Malone's elbows in the post were accidental. They were part of the argument he was making about the space he occupied, which was that the space cost something to enter and that the cost was physical and negotiated at every single possession through contact that the referees of the 1980s and 1990s viewed as acceptable because the game was physical then in ways the current game is not. A 1987 Sports Illustrated profile described him as having negligible body fat and a nasty disposition, which was accurate in both components. The body fat was confirmed by the conditioning work he did in the off-season, power hiking, cross-training, year-round preparation that kept his weight consistent across a career that most players would have declined through by their mid-30s. The nasty disposition was confirmed by everyone who entered his paint. Michael Jordan received a Malone elbow that produced a gushing nosebleed, which was not a flagrant foul in the officiating environment of the 1990s, but was the kind of contact that made the nose bleed with sufficient force to require attention. Doc Rivers, who played contemporaneously with Malone and later coached against him, said, "He was extremely physical and at times borderline cheap, but that didn't bother me because he was trying to win." That sentence is a reasonable summary of how the NBA understood Karl Malone's elbows, which was as the tools of a competitor who had decided that the inside of the lane was his real estate and that the people who wanted to enter it were going to pay the price he set for entry. The mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays. Scottie Pippen said this on June 1st, 1997, which was a Sunday, at the free throw line in Game 1 of the NBA Finals at the United Center in Chicago. Karl Malone was standing at the line with the game tied at 82 and 9 seconds remaining. He had been fouled by Dennis Rodman going over the back on a scramble for a John Stockton miss, and he had just played 42 minutes of finals basketball against a Bulls defense that had assigned Rodman to him specifically because Rodman was the only defender available who could make Malone uncomfortable. Not stop him, but force him into jump shots rather than post-ups, which was the marginal defensive advantage the Bulls could realistically achieve. Malone had made 6 of his 20 shots in Game 2, which was a bad number for a player averaging 27 points on 53% from the field. The pressure of the finals had compressed his efficiency. He was at the line with a chance to give the Jazz an 84-82 lead with 9 seconds left, which would have required something extraordinary from Jordan to overcome. Then Pippen leaned over and put the phrase in his ear. "I just whispered in his ear," Pippen said afterward. "The mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays. It was off the top of my head, freestyle. It actually wasn't personal. Karl was my guy. It was a joke because my brother was a mailman." Malone stepped to the line and missed both free throws, and Jordan caught the rebound and called timeout, and then dribbled out the waning seconds and hit a 20-footer at the buzzer, and the Bulls led the series 1-0. The moment is one of the most documented in the history of the sport because it compressed everything that Jordan represented: the competitive intelligence, the clutch gene, the willingness to take the last shot in a tied game against the best power forward in the world who had just won the Most Valuable Player award, into 9 seconds and 1 basket. The MVP award is the context that makes everything else in the 2 final series between Jordan and Malone comprehensible. In 1997, Karl Malone won the award. He averaged 27 points and 10 rebounds per game for a Utah Jazz team that won 64 games, and he received 986 points in the voting, while Michael Jordan received 957. The margin was 29 points, the second closest in the history of media balloting. Malone was the appropriate winner in the statistical sense. His numbers and his team's record justified the award. But the award had been Jordan's in 5 of the previous 6 years, and voter fatigue is real and documented. And Phil Jackson said afterward that the Bulls had won 69 games with a roster that missed Dennis Rodman for almost 30 games, and that there was no earthly explanation for winning 69 games, except that Michael won it so many times, and this may have been Malone's opportunity. Jordan characteristically did not complain. He said in an interview before the finals, "I can't gripe with that. I can't have any jealousy or animosity toward Karl." But he also said, "I add that to the challenge I'm presenting to myself. This is the MVP of the finals." And then, after winning the finals MVP for the 5th time, I'm not saying he wasn't deserving of it. All I'm saying is that fueled the fire in me. Okay, you think he's the MVP? That's fine, no problem. The internal logic of that sequence, a public acknowledgement of Malone's legitimacy concealing a private conversion of the award into competitive fuel, is Jordan's specific genius as a competitor, which was not the genius of being angry, but the genius of converting whatever was given to him, including gestures of respect toward someone else, into the exact accelerant his own performance required. Malone, upon receiving the MVP trophy, said, "I thank Michael for letting me borrow it for 1 year." The quote has the shape of a joke and contains the substance of something else, which is the understanding that the award was normally Jordan's, and that Malone had been given it on a 1-year loan, while Jordan's voters recovered from the fatigue of voting for the same person repeatedly. There is something in that sentence, the self-awareness, the acknowledgement that the trophy lived in Jordan's house and was visiting Malone's briefly. That suggests Malone knew exactly what the situation was, and also knew that the situation was going to be tested on the floor in June, where the award that mattered most was not the regular season MVP, but the Larry O'Brien Trophy and the Finals MVP that went with it. The 1997 finals began in Chicago because the Bulls had the better record after the Pistons, Magic, and then the Spurs had all given way to the teams that eventually became dynasties. Malone scored 31 points in Game 1 at the United Center. The Jazz led by 1 with 9 seconds left. And then Pippen whispered, and Malone missed both free throws, and Jordan hit the buzzer beater, and the series was 1-0 before it had really begun. The Jazz won Game 3 and Game 4 in Utah, with Malone scoring 37 points in Game 3 on a night when Phil Jackson put Dennis Rodman on him, and Rodman discovered what everyone who had tried to stop Malone in the post had discovered, which was that the argument his body made was not defeatable by a single defender. Jordan, asked afterward about Rodman's performance, said, "He's going against one of the 50 greatest players in the game. Karl Malone is not lunch meat." The quote is Jordan at his most accurate, acknowledging the quality of the opponent with the directness that his own competitiveness required. You cannot convert adequate opponents into fuel. Jordan needed to believe, truthfully, that what he was facing was great. Malone was great. Jordan won the series in 6 games and averaged 32 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists, and won the Finals MVP. The summer between 1997 and 1998 is the summer in which everything that happened in the 2 final series was metabolized by both players and by the league. The Jazz came back in 1998 with the best record in the NBA at 62-20, the same as the Bulls, which was the first time the two teams had finished with equal records. Jordan won the regular season MVP that year, which was partly a correction. He had been the better player in the regular season in 1997 and had not received the award, and partly the voters returning to the obvious choice after a 1-year experiment in looking elsewhere. Malone had a legitimate argument for the 1998 award as well. He had been better than Jordan in win shares, PR, box plus minus, and value over replacement player, and his Jazz had won both regular season head-to-head matchups with Chicago. But the voters gave it back to Jordan, which Malone accepted without complaint, because Malone was not someone who complained about what he received or did not receive from external sources. He was the mailman. He delivered regardless of what the mailbox contained. The 1998 finals opened differently than 1997. Utah won Game 1, 88-85 in overtime in Salt Lake City, with Malone putting up 21 points. The series went to Chicago. The Bulls won Games 2, 3, and 4. The Jazz won Game 5 in Chicago, with Malone scoring 39 points on 17 for 27 shooting, the same game in which Jordan scored 33 points with a temperature that had kept him bedridden and nauseated in his hotel room for most of the previous 24 hours. Jordan's personal trainer, Tim Grover, had spent the night of June 10th watching Jordan shiver under multiple blankets in a hotel room in Salt Lake City, and had called team physician John Hefferon at 3 in the morning because he was genuinely uncertain whether Jordan would be able to play the following evening. Jordan played. He scored 21 points in the first half with a body that was metabolizing a fever, while simultaneously executing the specific muscular and cognitive demands of professional basketball at the finals level. By the fourth quarter, he had been playing on fumes for 6 minutes, and with 15 seconds remaining, he hit a three-pointer from the left wing over Stockton, and was so exhausted after releasing the ball that Pippen caught him before he fell. The final score was 90-88, Bulls. Jordan collapsed into Pippen's arms at the horn. The image of Pippen supporting an exhausted Jordan while the Delta Center crowd sat in silence is as famous as the image of Jordan's held follow-through from Game 6, and the two photographs taken together describe something about what Jordan was willing to do with his body in the service of winning that is difficult to describe any other way. Malone's 39 points in that same game is not as famous because he won, and because the winner of a game that Jordan loses in the flu game is not the story that November writes itself around. He won. He scored 39 points against the best defensive team in the league on basketball's largest stage. That is the mailman delivering. Game 6, June 14th, 1998. Delta Center, Salt Lake City, Utah. The Jazz held a 3-2 series lead when the series left Chicago. They had home court. They had the MVP whose award had been taken back in the regular season, but whose performances in the series had been consistent. 27 points per game across 6 games. The kind of production that wins championships when it is distributed across a team that can finish. Scottie Pippen had aggravated a back injury on the opening slam dunk of Game 6 and spent the rest of the game managing pain rather than playing basketball, which meant Jordan was taking 35 of the Bulls' 67 total shots and scoring 45 points in 44 minutes, which is again a description of what Jordan did when his team had nothing left to give him except the ball and the expectation that the ball would be enough. The Jazz led 86-83 with 41 seconds remaining when John Stockton hit a three-pointer that sent the Delta Center into the particular sound that arena crowds make when a championship appears to be arriving. Jordan answered with a layup. 86-85, 18 seconds left. The Jazz brought the ball to the low post. Karl Malone, 6 feet 9 inches and 256 pounds, the second leading scorer in the history of professional basketball, the man who had been winning MVPs while Jordan was borrowing the award, established position in the low block. Jordan was behind him. This is the moment the script had been building toward since Game 1 of 1997, since the MVP award and the borrowed trophy and the whispered mailman joke and the missed free throws and the 37 points in Game 3 and the 39 in Game 5 and all of it. The entire argument between these two men about what excellence meant when it competed against excellence. Malone in the post, Jordan behind him. Jordan reached. He got his right hand on the ball and stripped it free. The steal. Bob Costas on the NBC broadcast called it as it happened. Malone to the post. Malone, stripped by Michael, to the floor, stolen by MJ. Michael the steal. 16 seconds left. Bulls down 1. The language of that call is the language of disbelief compressed into seconds. The announcer's voice rising on the word stolen, because what had just happened was that the best post scorer of the generation had been stripped from behind by a 6'6" shooting guard who had already given 45 points of offensive effort and was operating on whatever remained after 44 minutes at that level. Jordan dribbled up the court. 17 seconds. The championship or Game 7, hanging on whatever happened next. Malone did not lose the ball against mediocre defenders. He had been posting up in the NBA for 13 years and had learned every technique for protecting the ball in the low post. And he had the body to make those techniques work regardless of the defender's effort. But Jordan was not a mediocre defender and was not approaching this possession with the energy of a man who had already given 45 points worth of offensive effort in 44 minutes and was conserving what remained. He was approaching it with the energy of someone who had decided, in 1997 when the MVP award went to Malone, and in the summer between the series, and in every game of the 1998 finals, that this moment was the moment the entire argument resolved itself, and that the resolution required getting his hand on the ball. He got his hand on the ball. He dribbled up the court. Brian Russell guarded him on the left wing, 10 seconds on the clock, the championship in whichever direction the next possession went. Jordan dribbled right, Russell with him, then crossed back to his left, and Jordan's right hand touched Russell's hip. A push-off, a helping hand to a broke-down comrade, in Phil Jackson's later characterization, delivered with a smile that acknowledged exactly what had happened. And Russell stumbled, and Jordan elevated, and the ball left his hand in the follow-through that became one of the most photographed moments in the history of sport. The arm extended, the wrist bent. The ball already through the net, Russell falling away behind him, 87-86 with 5.2 seconds remaining. Jordan's right arm stayed up. He held the follow-through for a moment that the cameras captured and that every subsequent discussion of the shot has returned to, because the held follow-through was not theater, but certainty. The certainty of someone who had released the ball and known, before it completed its arc, that the arc was going to end where arcs like that one always ended. Utah called timeout. John Stockton took the inbounds, drove to the arc, shot the three that would have sent it to Game 7, missed. The Bulls celebrated. Jordan was Finals MVP for the 6th time, which was the number of times the Bulls had won the championship. A perfect correspondence between the team's rings and Jordan's individual award that no one who played in 6 finals had achieved before or has achieved since. He retired for the 2nd time 3 months later. He came back in 2001 with the Washington Wizards, averaged 20 points per game at 38 years old, and retired finally in 2003. Brian Russell, during Jordan's first retirement, had approached him and said, "Why did you quit? You know I could guard you." At his Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 2009, Jordan recalled this conversation and said, "From this day forward, if I ever see him in shorts, I'm coming at him." He was not joking. He was making the specific kind of promise that people who do what Jordan did in Game 6 are entitled to make, which is the promise of someone who has already demonstrated, in front of the largest television audience in the history of the NBA Finals, exactly what happens when he comes at you. Karl Malone was asked in 2020 for the documentary The Last Dance about Michael Jordan and about Game 6. He was reluctant. The interviewer said, "So when I say the name Michael Jordan, what comes to mind?" Malone said, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan. Like, what else I need to say? The interviewer asked about the steal. Malone said, "Why? Why do I have to? But I'll tell you this. I'm all man, and I accept the responsibility for not winning more. And we was there, but we just happened to be playing the Chicago Bulls, which wasn't just Michael Jordan, by the way. He was right that it was not just Michael Jordan. The 1997 and 1998 Bulls had Scottie Pippen, who when healthy was capable of 25 points and 12 assists in a finals game, and who had whispered the mailman line into Malone's ear in 1997. They had Dennis Rodman, who had pulled 8.7 rebounds per game across the two final series, and who had made Malone take more jump shots than in any previous playoff series of his career by refusing to give him post position. They had Phil Jackson and the triangle, and the specific geometry of a system that distributed responsibility in ways that made double-teaming Jordan expensive and double-teaming Malone unnecessary, because Pippen and Rodman were already doing what the double team was supposed to do. But it was Michael Jordan, not exclusively, but predominantly, in the specific moments that decided the games that decided the series. Game 1 of 1997, Malone to the line, game tied, 9 seconds, Pippen's whisper, 2 missed free throws, Jordan's buzzer beater. That sequence required Pippen's wit and the specific misfortune of Malone's free throw mechanics on that particular Sunday. But the shot at the end was Jordan's, and Jordan's alone, hit over Brian Russell in the way that Jordan hit every shot over everyone eventually, which was by rising a fraction of a second later and holding the follow-through and letting the ball complete the arc that his own certainty had already computed. Game 6 of 1998, Malone in the post, Jordan behind him, the steal, the dribble up the floor, the crossover, the push-off, the elevation, the follow-through, the held arm, Russell falling away, the net. That sequence also required Pippen's screen setting and Horace Grant's positioning and Ron Harper's defense, but the hands that found the ball in the low post and the hands that held the follow-through on the shot were the same hands. Karl Malone scored more points in professional basketball than every player in history except one. He made 14 All-Star teams. He won 2 Olympic gold medals, including one on the Dream Team of 1992, alongside Jordan, and they were teammates before they were adversaries in the finals. And the difference between how they performed together and how they performed against each other contains something about what competition does to excellence that purely cooperative contexts do not reveal. Together they were unbeatable. Against each other, one of them was unbeatable, and the other was extremely good. The margin between extremely good and unbeatable across 2 final series against the greatest player who ever competed in those circumstances was a whisper and a stolen ball, and a held follow-through and 5.2 seconds. Malone played until he was 40 years old. He signed with the Los Angeles Lakers in 2003, chasing the championship that had twice been taken by Jordan and twice by the Stockton-Malone partnership's limitations in the specific category of stopping a player who could not be stopped. He tore ligaments in his knee in that final season and played in the finals against the Detroit Pistons, who won in 5 games, and Malone's championship remained ungotten. He was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2010, presented by Stockton. He finished his career second in scoring history, first in free throw attempts, 2-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, 2-time Olympic gold medalist. He was the mailman. He delivered 36,000 points to the league over 19 seasons, and the league gave him back everything except the one thing he wanted most, which was a championship, which Jordan had arranged to not be available. The arm stays up in the photograph. Jordan at the top of the arc, follow-through extended, wrist bent, the ball already gone, already through, Russell in the process of falling. The photograph is from the baseline camera that Fernando Medina had positioned specifically to capture whatever happened at the far end of the court in the game's final seconds, and what happened was the last shot Jordan ever took as a Chicago Bull, which was a shot over Brian Russell to win the championship after stealing the ball from Karl Malone. The arm stays up because Jordan knew before the ball arrived. The mailman had delivered, across 19 seasons and 36,000 points, and everything that required of a body and a will and a consistency of effort that the game has not since produced at that scale. In Game 6, with 18 seconds left and the championship available, Jordan went behind him and took the delivery and made it his own.